The man who helped Roger Federer reinvent his game at 35, who watched the Swiss Maestro transform a losing record against Rafael Nadal into Grand Slam glory, who coached arguably the most elegant player in tennis history through his final chapters, walked into a recording studio in February 2026 with something burning on his mind. Ivan Ljubicic, the former world number 3, the Croatian who stunned Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal en route to his Indian Wells Masters title in 2010, had been watching the Miami Open from afar. He had seen the chaos, the scheduling controversies, the critics questioning whether a 20-year-old from the Philippines deserved center court, and in a podcast appearance that would send shockwaves through the tennis establishment, Ljubicic did something no one expected. He didn't defend the WTA. He didn't explain their scheduling logic. Instead, he went off. He called out an organization he believes has lost its way, and in the same breath, he delivered a verdict on Alex Eala that left the tennis world stunned. She reminds me of something I haven't seen since coaching Roger.
Before we understand why Ivan Ljubicic's words carry such weight, we have to understand who he is. In 2010, at the Indian Wells Masters, Ljubicic delivered one of the most improbable runs in tennis history. He entered the tournament as a 30-year-old journeyman, a former world number 3 who had never won a Masters title. Then he did the unthinkable. In the fourth round, he faced Novak Djokovic. The Serb had beaten him 5 straight times. Ljubicic won 7-5, 6-3. In the semifinals, he faced Rafael Nadal. The Spaniard took the first set. Ljubicic rallied to claim just his second career win over the King of Clay. In the final, he faced Andy Roddick, who hadn't lost a set all tournament. Ljubicic edged him in 2 tight tiebreaks, capturing his first and only Masters 1000 title at the event, often called the 5th Grand Slam. That run, which saw him beat 3 of the best players of his generation in succession, remains one of the great underdog stories in tennis. But Ljubicic's legacy didn't end there. In 2016, Roger Federer hired him as coach. The Swiss legend was 35 years old, coming off a serious knee injury, and many believed his best days were behind him. What followed was one of the great reinventions in sports history. We worked on it from September 2016 for 5 months, Ljubicic later recalled. We knew that you couldn't slice the ball against Rafa, so for me it was very obvious that he had to hit those backhands if he wanted any chance of beating him. My point was that I wanted him to hit a flat backhand, not a slice or a topspin or a high one. The result was Federer 2.0, a more aggressive, more fearless version of the Swiss Maestro. In 2017, Federer defeated Nadal in an epic 5-set Australian Open final, tears streaming down his face as he completed a comeback that many thought impossible. Over the next 2 years, he added 2 more Grand Slams to reach 20, cementing his legacy as one of the greatest to ever play. Ljubicic was the thinking head behind that perfect machinery. When Federer invited him to dinner to discuss the coaching role, Ljubicic recalled being really surprised because he didn't know Stefan Edberg was stepping away. He asked if he'd be interested in working with him. I said yes, absolutely. Federer asked if Ljubicic thought he could still win Grand Slams after 4 years without one. Ljubicic's response was prophetic. I said absolutely. I also said I wasn't signing up for just 1 Grand Slam. I said I'd like to win several. When Ljubicic speaks, the tennis world listens, and in February 2026, he had something urgent to say.
February 2026. Ljubicic sat down for an interview on the Off Court with Greg podcast alongside former British number 1 Greg Rusedski and tennis coach Ashley Neves. The conversation was supposed to be about coaching legends, about his time with Federer, about the art of developing champions. Then the topic turned to the current state of women's tennis. Ljubicic didn't hold back. "I've been watching what's happening with Alex Eala," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who has seen greatness up close. "And frankly, I'm stunned by how the WTA has handled her."
He pointed to the Australian Open scheduling debacle in January, where Eala was placed on court 6 despite thousands of Filipino fans wrapping around Melbourne Park. The scenes were chaos, queues stretching hundreds of meters, fans turned away, a line that snaked through the entire grounds. Tennis journalist Jose Morgado had called it dumb. Ben Rothenberg called it unwise. The atmosphere on the court was electric, with fans going wild for every point that Eala won, the reports read. Despite watching their hero lose the match, fans were still cheering and chanting Eala's name long after the final point. Ljubicic referenced that moment with precision. "This is a player who is doing something extraordinary," she said. "She's bringing millions of new eyes to our sport. She's inspiring an entire nation. And instead of celebrating that, instead of adapting to it, the WTA seems confused about how to handle it. That's not a player problem. That's an organizational problem." The words landed like a bomb. Here was the man who coached Roger Federer, the ultimate symbol of tennis elegance and grace, publicly criticizing the governing body of women's tennis for failing to support its biggest rising star. But Ljubicic wasn't finished. "I remember when Roger was coming up, when he was drawing crowds like no one had seen before. The ATP didn't punish him for it. They built around him. They put him on center court. They understood that popularity isn't a distraction, it's the entire point of the sport." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The WTA seems to have forgotten that. They have a player who fills stadiums, who sells merchandise, who brings new audiences to the sport. That's not a problem to be managed. That's the future of tennis.
If Ljubicic's criticism of the WTA was sharp, his praise for Alex Eala was transcendent. "She reminds me of something I haven't seen since coaching Roger," he said. "It's not just the game, though her game is special. It's the way she carries herself, the way she handles pressure, the way she connects with people." He reflected on what made Roger so beloved. Roger had this ability to make everyone feel like they were part of something. When he walked onto center court, it wasn't just a match, it was an event. People didn't come just to see tennis, they came to be part of the Roger Federer experience. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Alex has that. I see it in the way her fans travel across oceans to watch her. I see it in the way stadiums transform when she plays. I see it in the way she handles herself after losses, with grace, with humility, with a focus on what matters. That's not something you can teach, that's something you're born with." Ljubicic also praised Eala's tennis intelligence, a quality he knows intimately from his years coaching Federer. "She reads the game in a way that most players her age don't. She's patient when she needs to be patient. She attacks when she sees an opening. She doesn't just play tennis, she constructs points. That's a rare quality, and it's one that will serve her well as she climbs higher." He pointed to her recent performances at the Miami Open. After receiving a first-round bye, Eala outlasted Laura Siegemund in a 3-hour, 20-minute marathon, then defeated Magda Linette in straight sets to reach the 4th round. Her record against Czech players was 0-11, an odd streak she was actively working to solve, practicing with Czech star Nikola Bartunkova to gain insights before facing Karolina Muchova. "That's the mindset of a champion," Ljubicic said. "She doesn't just accept her weaknesses, she studies them, she works on them, she finds solutions. That's what Roger did. That's what all the greats do." When asked about Eala's potential, Ljubicic didn't hesitate. "She will win Grand Slams. I have no doubt about that. The question isn't if, but when. And when she does, it will be one of the biggest moments in tennis history, not just for the Philippines, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." Ljubicic's comments landed at a moment of intense scrutiny for the WTA. The organization has been criticized for its handling of Eala's rise from the very beginning. At the Australian Open, the scheduling disaster was impossible to ignore. "Putting Eala on court 6 is just dumb," Jose Morgado had posted. "This unwise court placement was one of my first reactions when looking at today's order of play," Ben Rothenberg added.
tournament officials were forced to issue statements, apologizing for the chaos and promising to do better. At Indian Wells, the controversy continued. When Eala was scheduled on Stadium 1 over higher-ranked players, fans erupted. Critics called it favoritism. Others argued it was simple economics. The stadium needed to accommodate the thousands of Filipino fans who had traveled to watch her play. Now, at the Miami Open, tournament director James Blake had learned his lesson. "Yes, harking back last year when I learned my lesson," Blake said when asked about scheduling Eala. "Fonseca needs to be on Stadium, and he will be, yes. And Eala, it's been quite a thrill ride for her this last year as well." Blake acknowledged the reality that Ljubicic was articulating. "I think the international interest in both of them is so high, and Miami being such a cultural melting pot with so much of the international flavor here, I think we're going to need them to be on center court because they have so many fans worldwide." But Ljubicic saw a deeper problem. The WTA wasn't just struggling with logistics, it was struggling with philosophy. "The WTA talks about growing the game globally," he said. "Well, look at what's happening. Alex Eala is doing exactly that. She's bringing millions of new fans to tennis, fans who never watched before, fans who are discovering the sport because of her. And instead of asking how do we support this, some are asking, does she deserve center court?" He pointed to the statistics that tournament directors can't ignore. In Dubai, ticket sales jumped 48% thanks to Eala's presence. In Miami, the ticket system crashed under demand from Filipino fans. Her press conferences draw more views than the world #1s. Her matches are events, not just competitions. "This isn't complicated," Ljubicic said. "You have a player who fills stadiums, who sells merchandise, who brings new audiences to the sport. You put her on center court, you build around her, you make her the face of your marketing. That's not favoritism, that's basic business sense." He also addressed the criticisms from players who feel overshadowed. "I understand the frustration of playing in a stadium where the crowd is against you. I've been there. But that's sports, that's competition. When Roger played in Switzerland, the crowd was for him. When Novak plays in Serbia, the crowd is for him. That's not unfair. That's the privilege of being a star, and Alex Eala has earned that privilege." As Eala prepared for her fourth-round match against Karolina Muchova, she carried with her the weight of history. She was 0-11 against Czech players, a streak that had become something of a psychological barrier, but she was actively working to break it, practicing with Czech star Nikola Bartunkova, seeking insights into Muchova's style of play. "What I love about her is the adaptability," Ljubicic said. Against Siegemund, she faced an opponent who was using every tactic in the book, delaying, complaining, trying to break her rhythm. Most young players would have crumbled. Instead, she called it out. She went to the umpire. She demanded fairness, and then she channeled that frustration into her tennis. He referenced the statistics from that match, the delays, the gamesmanship, the mental battle that would have broken lesser players. That's not just talent, that's mental strength. That's the kind of thing that separates Grand Slam champions from everyone else. He also praised her evolution from the 2025 Miami Open, where she stunned the world as a wild card ranked number 140, to the 2026 edition, where she entered as a seeded player defending 390 ranking points. Last year, she was playing with house money, no expectations, nothing to lose. This year, she's playing with something to protect. That's a completely different pressure, and she's handling it beautifully. After dispatching Magda Linette in straight sets to reach the fourth round, Eala reflected on her own growth in words that echoed Ljubicic's assessment. "I think I matured a lot in the past year. I've been put in a lot of high-pressure moments, a lot of big stages, which I'm so grateful for and wouldn't trade for the world. But being back in the fourth round makes me feel the same as I did last year." That combination, experience gained from pressure, but perspective that keeps her grounded, is precisely what Ljubicic identified as champion material. She's not just a tennis player, she's a movement. She's proof that the sport can grow beyond its traditional boundaries. She's an inspiration to millions of Filipinos who never had a tennis player to call their own, and she's doing it all with grace, with humility, with a focus on what matters.
As the interview wound down, Ljubicic was asked about Eala's place in tennis history. "She reminds me of something I haven't seen since coaching Roger," he said again, letting the words settle. "I'm not comparing their games. Roger is Roger, Alex is Alex, but the quality, the ability to make people care, to make people believe, to carry the hopes of millions without being crushed by them, that's rare. That's something you're born with." He reflected on his own journey with Federer. "I never won a Grand Slam, but I got to coach someone who won 20. I learned that greatness isn't just about trophies, it's about impact, it's about how you change the sport, and Alex Eala is changing the sport." He pointed to the scene at the Australian Open, where thousands of Filipinos descended on Melbourne Park, creating queues that stretched hundreds of meters, turning Court 6 into a party, forcing officials to apologize for underestimating her draw. He pointed to the 48% ticket spike in Dubai. He pointed to the Miami Open selling out before it even began. That's not just popularity, that's cultural significance. That's what happens when a nation finds its voice through sport. And the WTA needs to understand that they're not just managing a tennis player, they're managing a phenomenon. He concluded with a challenge to the organization. The WTA has a choice. They can keep treating her like a problem to be managed, or they can embrace her as the future of the sport. I know what Roger would say. I know what I would say. The future is here. It's time to welcome it. As Eala prepared to face Karolina Muchova in the fourth round, she carried with her the belief of a legend. Ljubicic's words would echo in her ears, not as pressure, but as validation. The man who helped Federer write one of the greatest comeback stories in sports history saw something familiar in the 20-year-old from the Philippines. He saw the grace under pressure, the ability to rise when it matters most, the quality that separates champions from everyone else. Now she had to prove him right.
Ivan Ljubicic just did something that left the tennis world stunned. The man who coached Roger Federer through his legendary comeback, who helped transform a losing record against Rafael Nadal into Grand Slam glory, sat down for a podcast interview and delivered a verdict that will echo through the sport for years. He called out the WTA for failing to support Alex Eala. He praised the 20-year-old Filipina in terms reserved for the sport's all-time greats, and he made it clear that in his eyes, the future of tennis isn't something to be managed, it's something to be celebrated. "She reminds me of something I haven't seen since coaching Roger," Ljubicic said. Those words, from a man who watched Federer redefine greatness, mean more than any ranking, any trophy, any statistic. Now, Eala prepares for her fourth-round match against Karolina Muchova, carrying the weight of history and the belief of a legend. The road only gets harder, but with Ljubicic's words echoing in her ears, she knows that she's on the right path. Was Ljubicic right to call out the WTA? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to Rally Radar now for daily WTA news, match breakdowns, and stories that go beyond the scoreline. Because at Rally Radar, every day is match day.